In 1963, a woman named Dorothy Higson did her entire week's shopping on a single street in Burnley without once entering a supermarket because there was no supermarket on her street. She went to the baker for bread, the butcher for meat, the greengrocer for vegetables, the fishmonger for fish on a Friday, the draper for the buttons she needed, and the ironmonger for the hook she wanted behind the bathroom door. Every shopkeeper knew her by name. The fishmonger saved her a piece of smoked haddock on Thursdays because she always wanted it. Number 14 on this list was on every high street in Britain and across France, Germany, and Belgium until the mid-1970s and has now so completely vanished that most people under 40 do not know what the word means. Number 7 provided a service so specific and so personal that no website, no app, and no supermarket aisle has ever successfully replaced it. And number 1, the shop at the very top of this list, was not a luxury or a speciality. It was simply the most important retail relationship that most working-class European families had, visited more often than any other shop, known more intimately than any other shopkeeper, and replaced by something that cannot remember your name or ask how your daughter is getting on at school. These are 20 European shops that have completely disappeared, present on every high street and in every neighborhood from the 1950s through the 1970s and gone by the 1990s, replaced by the supermarket, the out-of-town retail park, and eventually the internet, in a restructuring of European commercial life so complete that the generation who grew up after it cannot imagine what came before. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, because what Dorothy Higson's shopping street represented was not merely a way of buying things. It was the commercial infrastructure of a community, and its disappearance changed the nature of neighborhood life in ways that 40 years of urban regeneration policy have never managed to reverse. Let us count them down. Number 20, the tripe dresser. The tripe dresser was the specialist butcher who prepared and sold the stomach lining of cattle, cleaned and dressed to varying degrees of preparation depending on regional tradition. In Lancashire, Yorkshire, and the industrial Midlands, and in the equivalent districts of northern France and Belgium, the tripe shop was a fixture of the working-class high street from the Victorian era through to the late 1970s. The Manchester tripe dresser of the 1960s stocked dressed tripe in at least 4 varieties: honeycomb, blanket, thick seam, and elder. A working tripe shop in Manchester in 1965 might serve 200 customers per week, each knowing exactly which variety they preferred. When the appetite for tripe declined as younger generations rejected their parents' table, the tripe dressers closed one by one, the specific knowledge of preparation accumulated over a century vanishing with them. Number 19, the wet fish shop. Before frozen fish and the supermarket fish counter, the wet fish shop was the Friday destination for every household that ate fish on Fridays, which in working-class Catholic communities meant nearly everyone. The wet fish shop displayed its stock on crushed ice, with whole fish, fillets, kippers, smoked haddock, bloaters, and shellfish arranged so the customer could see exactly what the boat had brought in. The fishmonger who served Dorothy Higson saved her smoked haddock on Thursdays because she was a reliable customer, and he knew that old Mr. Brennan had stopped coming in since his wife died because he no longer cooked for himself. A productive wet fish shop in a working-class district of any British coastal city in the 1960s served between 300 and 500 customers per week. When the supermarket offered frozen fish at prices that undercut the fresh fish shop, the fishmonger could not compete and retreated to coastal towns. Number 18, the draper's shop. The drapers sold cloth, haberdashery, ribbons, buttons, elastic, zips, thread, and knitting wool in quantities and varieties that no modern fabric shop has matched. A good draper in a working-class town in the 1960s stocked between 200 and 300 different threads, every size of button in every material, curtain fabric by the yard in dozens of patterns, and all the elastic and binding tape that the home dressmaker needed. He knew which customers were making what, and a draper who paid attention could often tell a customer she was missing a particular item before she had realized it herself. When home dressmaking declined through the 1970s, as machine-made clothing became affordable, the high street draper closed and the specialist haberdashery knowledge went with it. Number 17, the ironmonger. The ironmonger's shop was the hardware store of the post-war European high street, but managed with a specificity and depth of stock that no modern DIY superstore has attempted. A working ironmonger in Britain in the 1960s sold individual screws by the single unit, counted from a drawer. He sold paraffin by the pint, poured from a drum into the customer's own container. He stocked replacement parts for appliances not manufactured for 20 years because his customers needed those parts, and throwing things away was not how things were done. The ironmonger, who had been in the same premises for 30 years, knew the plumbing configuration of most of the houses on his delivery round because he had supplied their fittings since they were built. When the DIY superstore arrived in the late 1970s and 1980s, offering lower prices on fast-moving stock while ignoring slow-moving specialist items, the ironmonger could not compete. Number 16. The Cobbler and Shoe Repair Shop. Every high street in Britain and across continental Europe until the mid-1980s had at least one cobbler who could resole a pair of leather shoes, replace a worn heel, stretch a tight fitting, and return a shoe to serviceable condition for a fraction of the cost of a new pair. The cobbler in Britain in the early 1970s resold a pair of men's leather shoes for between 30 and 50 pence, roughly a 20th of the cheapest new leather shoe. A productive cobbler in a busy district served between 40 and 80 customers per week. When shoes became cheap enough that repair was more expensive than replacement, the cobbler retreated to the premium market and disappeared from the working-class high street. First pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. Because the shops described so far have all been primarily food or goods specialists, but the next entries describe the service shops and personal relationship businesses that surrounded the goods shops on the post-war European high street, providing not merely products but knowledge, judgment, and the kind of continuous personal service that no transaction in the modern retail economy replicates. Number 15. The Pawnbroker. The pawnbroker's 3 brass balls hung above the doorway of a shop on every working-class high street in Britain, and their equivalents in France, Germany, and the Benelux countries. The pawnbroker provided short-term secured credit against pledged personal possessions at a time when working-class families had no access to bank credit and when the gap between wages at the beginning of the week and money running out at the end was a regular feature of household management. A pawnbroker serving a working-class district in Britain in the early 1970s might hold between 200 and 400 pledged items at any given time, from wedding rings and watches to overcoats and tools, each valued, recorded, and stored against the owner's return. When consumer credit expanded and the credit card made short-term borrowing available without pledging a possession, the pawnbroker's primary market contracted. Number 14. The Herbalist and the Herb Shop. Before the health food shop and before the pharmacy expanded its stock to include vitamins and supplements, the herbalist's shop sold dried herbs, herbal remedies, and patent medicines of traditional origin. The herbalist in a working-class district of any British industrial city in the 1960s stocked between 100 and 200 different herbs and herbal preparations, sold by weight from glass jars on open shelves. A customer who came in with a complaint received advice as well as a remedy from a practitioner whose knowledge was often genuinely extensive. When the Medicines Act of 1968 tightened the regulation of medicinal claims and the pharmaceutical industry's products became increasingly dominant, the herbalist's business model became legally complicated and commercially uncompetitive. Number 13. The Wool Shop. In every British, French, German, and Belgian town until the early 1980s, the wool shops stocked every weight and color of knitting wool, every size of needle, every pattern book published, and every accessory required by the domestic knitter. The wool shop owner in Britain in the 1970s had a knowledge of yarn construction, tension, pattern difficulty, and color compatibility that represented genuine professional expertise, and the advice she gave to a customer struggling with a difficult pattern was of genuine practical value. When machine-knitted garments became cheap enough to compete with the cost of hand-knitting materials plus the time required, the economic justification for domestic knitting declined, and the wool shop lost its primary market. Number 12. The Record Shop. Before Spotify and before the supermarket began selling the 30 best-selling albums at discounted prices, the independent record shop was where music was discovered, discussed, and purchased by the young people of post-war Europe. A good independent record shop in Britain in the 1970s stocked not only the chart albums, but the back catalogs, the imports, the jazz and classical sections, and the specialty genres that chain stores ignored. The record shop staff member who knew a customer who had bought one album would probably want to hear another one, like it was providing a recommendation service that the algorithm has been trying to replicate ever since. When the CD replaced vinyl, then the download replaced the CD, then the stream replaced the download, the independent record shop lost its product in 3 successive technological disruptions. Number 11. The Family Grocer and Provision Merchant. The family grocer was not the supermarket. He was a shop stocking a curated range of provisions chosen by a proprietor who knew his customers, where every item was weighed or cut to the customer's requirement. The family grocer in a working-class district of Britain in the 1960s cut your cheese to the weight you wanted, sliced your ham to the thickness you preferred, and wrapped your purchases in paper. He knew that Mrs. Davies always wanted the end of the cheddar because she liked the rind, and that Mr. Morrison preferred the mild Dutch because of his digestion. When the supermarket offered lower prices, longer hours, and the convenience of a single shopping trip, the family grocer could not compete, and the personal relationship that was his only real advantage was not enough. Second pattern break. This next one is where the most personal memories live, because the shops described so far have all been food and goods retailers. But the next entries describe shops that provided services so personal and so embedded in the rhythm of daily life that their disappearance changed not just where people went to buy things, but how they spent their time and who they saw and spoke to as they moved through the week. Number 10. The Sewing Machine Repair Shop. The sewing machine that sat in every working-class household in Britain, France, and Germany was a precision mechanical instrument requiring regular maintenance and occasional repair, and the sewing machine repair shop was on every high street. A sewing machine repairer in Britain in the early 1970s charged between 50p and £1 to service a Singer or a Brother or a Jones. When cheap Asian sewing machines made the repair cost uneconomic relative to replacement cost, and when domestic sewing declined, the sewing machine repair shop closed and the specific mechanical knowledge disappeared with it. Number 9. The Typewriter Repair Shop. Every office in Europe in the 1960s and 1970s depended on the typewriter, and the typewriter repair shop on every commercial high street maintained these machines. A typewriter mechanic in Britain in the early 1970s earned between £4 and £6 per repair call and could service 8 to 10 machines per day. When the word processor replaced the typewriter through the 1980s, the typewriter repair shop had no product to service, no income, and no future, and the complex mechanical knowledge of the typewriter mechanism became valueless within a single decade. Number 8. The TV and Radio Repair Shop. Every high street until the late 1980s had at least one television and radio repair shop whose proprietor could diagnose and repair faults in valve and early transistor equipment. A productive television repairer in Britain in the early 1970s charged between £1.50 and £3 for a repair visit and could service 6 to 8 televisions on a full day's round. When the cost of new televisions fell below the economic threshold at which repair made financial sense, and when the technical complexity of solid-state electronics exceeded what the individual repairer could service, the high street repair shop became first uncompetitive and then impossible. Number 7. The Post Office Sub-Branch. Not the main post office, but the sub-branch that operated from the back room of a newsagent or sweet shop in every British village, every continental European small town, and every working-class urban neighborhood until the Postal Services Act of 2000 and the subsequent closure program eliminated 14,000 sub-branches across Britain alone. The sub-branch was where you paid your bills, collected your pension, bought your stamps, sent your parcels, and renewed your vehicle license without traveling to the town center. For elderly people who did not drive, and for working-class households conducting business outside normal office hours, it was the indispensable link between the individual and the state. When the closure program determined that sub-branches were unprofitable as individual units and ignored the network value they provided to communities without alternatives, 14,000 of them closed in 12 years. Number 6. The Family Butcher with Custom Cuts. The butcher of the post-war decades sold not only the prime cuts that the supermarket meat counter stocks today, but the whole range of the animal: offal, bones for stock, cheaper braising cuts, pig's trotters, ox cheek, shin, and all the rest of the working-class cooking repertoire that supermarket procurement has eliminated. He sharpened his knives every morning and could cut a single chop to whatever thickness the customer specified. When the supermarket offered pre-packaged meat at prices the independent butcher could not match, and when the range of cuts shrank to the dozen or so that centralized procurement could efficiently supply, the family butcher lost his market for common cuts and could survive only on premium products that working-class customers could not afford. Third pattern break. Here is where the story becomes most personal, because the final entries are not specialist trades or skilled services. They are the everyday shops that every person on every working-class street visited every week, whose owners knew their customers by name, and whose loss changed the texture of neighborhood life in ways that town planners and regeneration specialists have been trying to understand and reverse for 40 years. Number 5. The Corner Sweet Shop. The Corner Sweet Shop was not merely a place to buy sweets. It was the first independent commercial transaction of childhood, the first place a child was sent with money of their own to buy something of their own choosing. The proprietor sold individual sweets counted from glass jars at a penny for 4, or 2 for a halfpenny, entirely at the child's own pace, when the confectionery market consolidated into prepackaged formats, suiting supermarket distribution. The sweet shop, as a distinct establishment, disappeared. Number 4. The Post Office Savings Bank and Building Society Branch. Before internet banking, the Post Office Savings Bank Passbook and the local Building Society branch were the primary savings institutions for millions of European families without a current account at a commercial bank. The Building Society branch manager could make discretionary decisions about mortgage applications that the centralized scoring systems of modern banks do not permit. When the building societies demutualized through the 1980s and the Post Office Savings Bank transferred its counter services, the local personal savings relationship disappeared. Number 3. The local newspaper shop and reading room. Before the internet and before the free newspaper, the newsagent was the primary source of printed information for any European neighborhood. Some newsagents maintained a lending library of paperback books, a few pence per week. The proprietor knew which household took which papers and could tell you, from his delivery rounds, roughly how the political preferences of the street had shifted between elections. Number 2. The hardware and household goods shop on the high street. The high street household goods shop sold household linens, cleaning materials, brushes, mops, kitchen utensils, and every small item needed to maintain a household without the transport to reach an out-of-town retail park. It stocked replacement handles for brooms and mops, spare parts for standard kitchen equipment, and every size of nail and hook the domestic handyman needed without buying a pre-packaged assortment of which he would use 2 and discard 18. Number 1. The corner shop. At the very top of this list, above the tripe dresser and the wet fish shop and the draper and the ironmonger and all the rest, sits the corner shop, the general provision store that operated from the ground floor of a terraced house on every corner of every working-class street in Britain, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, opened before the other shops and closed after them, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. The corner shop was not merely convenient, it was the node of the street's daily life. The proprietor knew every household within 300 yards and their purchasing habits with a completeness that no loyalty card program has matched, not because he was collecting data, but because he was paying attention. He knew when a household was going through a difficult patch because the weekly spend dropped and the items changed. He knew when a new baby had arrived because the nappy purchase began. He knew when someone had fallen ill because their neighbor began buying in larger quantities than usual. Dorothy Higson did not need to tell her corner shopkeeper that her husband was unwell. He knew, and he had already set aside the particular biscuits that her husband liked and that she would not otherwise have thought to buy. These 20 disappeared shops share a quality that the modern retail environment has replaced with lower prices, wider ranges, and longer hours, all of which are genuine improvements on certain dimensions, while losing something that had no price and has therefore never appeared in any analysis of the gains and losses from retail restructuring. They were places where you were known, where the transaction was a conversation as well as an exchange, where the expertise of the person behind the counter was specific to your life and your street and your family rather than to the algorithm's model of your demographic. The supermarket knows that you buy a particular brand of tea. The corner shop knew that you drank more of it when your mother-in-law came to stay. That knowledge is what was lost, and the loss is not measurable in any currency except the one that matters most, which is the daily experience of being known by the people among whom you live. Your parents and grandparents had that experience as a natural feature of shopping for food. They did not know they had it. They called it going to the shops, and they were right. The knowledge is still here. They knew. Now you know too.